Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. A lot of interesting things going on in, of course, the Gilgo case, Rex Hume and Asa Ellerup agreeing to do a documentary, being paid seven figures, but something regarding the DNA. And I think this got a little bit blown out and a little bit confusing the way it was presented. And if you read the initial article that was written in Newsday, that no doubt most people were referencing when they went to this story, I'm just going to read a little bit of that article right now. A cheek swab sample collected from the estranged wife of alleged Gilgo Beach serial killer Rex Hume matched her DNA material found on the remains of some of the homicide victims. This was from a law enforcement source told Newsday. The DNA sample from Asa Ellerup was taken on July 13th, the night her husband and Massapequa Park resident was arrested on charges he killed three of the women whose remains were found near Gilgo Beach in 2010. Hume has pled not guilty to 3 counts each of first and second degree murder in the deaths of Melissa Bartolome, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello. Authorities said he is the prime suspect in the killing of a fourth victim, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, as a special grand jury is reviewing evidence in that case. The samples were taken to confirm earlier DNA tests Suffolk prosecutors said pointed to Ellerup as a source of hairs found with the remains. Ellerup has not been accused of wrongdoing in this case. It's much more complicated than all of this because these were not the first DNA tests that were conducted. Earlier in the year, there was some surreptitious, and I love that word, surreptitious. They collected some surreptitious DNA by detectives grabbing 12 bottles that were outside the Hume house. And those bottles were tested and swabbed for DNA. And the identification of a female was identified on one of the bottles and compared against hair on 3 of the Gilgo victims. So we're going to get deeper into that and explain it because it can be highly confusing because the way it was reported by a lot of stations earlier in the week was that there was brand new DNA, and that doesn't happen to be true. So hang on, and because you're joining the Off the Cuff, the Police Off the Cuff, true crime from the Police Off the Cuff podcast. There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped at 10th and Ranch by Glider.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger. We're going to get right into this. And joining me tonight is retired NYPD Sergeant, Professor, law degree, very reasonable person. Welcome to the show, retired Sergeant Michael Geary.
Hey, Billy. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Mike, always a pleasure to have you. And I just want to get right into it because there was a lot of reporting on this that had me confused. I was just like, wait a minute. Is there brand new DNA on this case? And what's the source of the DNA? I'm going to put a little slide up on the screen. And DNA is contained in blood, semen, skin cells, tissue, organs, muscle, brain cells, bone, teeth, hair, saliva, mucus, perspiration, fingernails, urine, feces, etc. Where can DNA evidence be found at a crime scene? DNA evidence can be collected from virtually anywhere. So for our purposes, why did I put that slide up there? Because what evidentiary DNA was left on these victims? And let's not forget, the bodies were there for over 10 years. So they were left out in the elements. So it would come to reason that the only type of thing that would survive being in those elements, and provided it was probably protected and covered some way, was hairs.
Yeah, Billy, it's very fortunate for the investigators that the bodies were wrapped in burlap, because if they had been maybe just buried under, a couple of inches of dirt, or that sort of thing, they probably would have all degenerated. But the fact that they were in burlap, and they might have been taped, and they were maybe they were just a little bit under the surface of the sand, just enough preservation that it really helped crack the case. Because without that DNA evidence, you've got cell phone evidence and cell tower evidence, things like that. You have the avalanche and you have some other things, but that is really fabulous. And perhaps in a way, if Rex Sherman is guilty, he actually is responsible for his own conviction by wrapping the bodies up the way he did.
Right from of course, that's the Gilgo Four on the screen. We never want to forget the victims of this case. Maureen Brainerd Barnes, who Rex Schumann has yet to be charged with, but according to the Suffolk County DA's office, they keep saying that the charges are imminent on that case. And of course, Megan Waterman, Melissa Bartolome, and Amber Lynn Costello. Mike, one of the most important documents on this case, and I can't believe that many people don't go to this document when really this is the Holy Grail. This is the Bible of this case. And I'm referring to page 25 of the bail application.
Right.
Now, DNA analysis of hairs recovered from an examination of the victims' bodies. During the course of this investigation, each of the 4 victims' bodies were examined by a forensic scientist with the Suffolk County Crime Laboratory, which revealed as follows. Miss Brainerd Barnes had been left restrained by 3 leather belts, one of which was utilized to tie Barnes' feet, ankle, legs together. During the examination of the belts, a female human hair was recovered from the buckle of one of the belts by the Suffolk County Crime Lab, hereafter referred to as female hair on Barnes. On or about December 18th, 2010, the Suffolk County Laboratory said this hair was able to determine that it corresponded to a Caucasian head hair fragment. Although this hair was not suitable for nuclear DNA profiling at that time, it was subsequently submitted for further DNA analysis. Megan Waterman had been bound by clear or white duct tape. During the course of the examination of Miss Waterman's body, 2 female human hairs were recovered, one from outside the head area and the other from the tape of the head area. Both hairs were recovered in the vicinity of Miss Waterman's head. Hereafter, 2 female hairs on Waterman. Examination by the Suffolk County Laboratory indicated that the 2 females' hairs on Waterman exhibited Caucasian European characteristics, but were unsuitable for further DNA testing at the time. The 2 female hairs on Waterman were subsequently submitted for further DNA analysis. So we're cutting to the chase. These hairs, it's going to be determined they, in fact, do belong to Asa Ellerup. Now, that raises a lot of questions, and we're going to get more into that later, but I want to get to the other, Amber Costello. An examination of the body of Amber Costello revealed that she appeared to have been bound by 3 pieces of clear or white duct tape. During the course of the examination of Miss Costello's body, a female human hair was recovered, specifically on a piece of tape inside of the burlap wrapping in the vicinity of Miss Costello's head. Hereinafter, female hair on Costello. A subsequent examination of female hair on Costello led to the determination that it had Caucasian European characteristics. However, it was unsuitable for further DNA testing at that time by the Suffolk County Crime Laboratory. Now, because we have to realize right now, Mike,
Right.
this is 2010.
Mm-hmm.
They did not have the technology back then that they have now to identify these hairs. And they used a process called mitochondrial DNA analysis. From what I understand now, and certainly I am no scientist, but they have gotten much better at identifying from a much less amount of DNA and identifying where the DNA came from. Your thoughts, Mike?
Billy, first I just want to welcome Heather, whatever, a new member, and just say welcome to the show. Leaps and bounds. I mean, I remember when DNA was first used in a criminal case in New York, and you remember that, and you actually needed, a pretty good amount of blood. They had no idea that you could get it from hair and all these other things. It was just amazing what they could do. And then we had the Twin Towers being attacked, and the DNA technology leaped a generation, just that. And then now, from 2010 to today, it's leaped several generations. And it's gotten better and better and better and better. Touch DNA, which you saw in the Koberger case, provided the pivotal piece of evidence they needed to narrow the search down to, Brian Koberger. It's fabulous what it's done. And the second, as you would maybe want to read it continuously on the next page, everything was resubmitted again with new technology, and it narrows everything down to Asa Ellerup. Very interesting.
Well, Mike, let me get to this. We'll get through this because there's just another page or so of this information. Forensic laboratory number 1, as noted above, the female hairs on Barnes, 2 female hairs on Waterman, female hair on Costello. Collectively, the female hairs recovered on the 3 victims were all sent to an outside forensic laboratory, hereinafter forensic laboratory number 1. Forensic laboratory number 1 applies DNA techniques in direct genome sequencing in difficult to solve forensic casework and the identification of human remains. In or about July 2022, forensic laboratory number 1 was able to determine that each of the aforementioned female hairs recovered on the 3 victims each belonged to a female individual and mitochondrial haplogroup K1C2, and that this female was not any of the victims. On or about July 21st, 2022, an undercover Suffolk County police detective recovered 11 bottles from a trash receptacle that had been left out for collection in front of the residence of defendant Rex Uhrman. The Suffolk County Crime Laboratory took swabs of said bottles, which was subsequently sent to Forensic Laboratory 1 for DNA profiling. Based on these new submissions, on or about February 24th, 2023, Forensic Laboratory number 1 was able to conclude that one of the DNA profiles generated from the aforementioned bottles taken from defendant Uhrman's residence indicated a female individual belonging to mitochondrial haplogroup K1C2, which is the same mitochondrial haplogroup as the female hairs recovered from the 3 victims. This profile was then compared against the previously tested female hair sample recovered on the remains of Miss Megan Waterman, which indicated that the 2 belonged to the same individual or someone closely related. Based upon the investigation and evidence recovered to date, that female is believed to be the wife of defendant Uhrman. Forensic Laboratory number 2, and we're almost through with this. On or about March 23rd, 2023, the Suffolk County Crime Laboratory requested Forensic Lab number 2, a lab specializing in forensic mitochondrial analysis, to conduct additional independent analysis. On or about June 12th, 2023, Forensic Laboratory number 2 issued a report concluding that the DNA sample from the female recovered from the bottles outside the residence of defendant Uhrman, i.e. Uhrman's wife, and the female hair on Costello indicated that the mitochondrial DNA profiles are the same at all compared positions common to and between samples, specifically at a rate that would, as per EMPOP database 5, exclude 99.98% to the 6th power of the North American population from the female hair on Costello. So what does all of this mean, Mike? And a lot of people will say, well, all of this occurred before July 13th, which is when Rex Uhrman was arrested. And what did they do on the day Rex Uhrman was arrested? They swabbed Asa Ellerup and her 2 children. They did a buccal swab. So that is the swab that took so long to come back, and now it has come back. I'm going to toss it to you, Mike.
And Billy, that pretty much slams the door shut. If you see DNA evidence as being, as accurate as they say it is, and we know it is very absolute accurate, it puts Asa Ellerup somehow in some sort of contact under some circumstances with 3 of the bodies that were recovered. Not the only one that she doesn't seem to have a hair attached to is Amber Costello. But other than that, in a way, it puts her right in the middle of the investigation. She's not just a third-hand witness. She's right there in the center.
John Donahue, thank you so much for the 1999 super sticker. Wouldn't Hares be expected she lived in the same house as Rex? John Donahue, 100%.
Mhm.
That could be transfer evidence, but to play that devil's advocate, could that also mean that the victims were killed inside that house?
You know,
There is a
yeah.
possibility of that, isn't there, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. And from what we know about Rex Heuermann, from just criminologists looking at him and just thinking about what he does and how he presents himself, he's been videotaped and things like that. Talking in that one presentation he did about his business, yeah, you would expect that he was a very controlled killer, and so therefore, he would probably feel very safe being in his own home where he can really control all of the circumstances rather than do it in a motel room or out in the woods somewhere. And the thing about it is, which makes it troubling if you want to just look at it from a devil's advocate point of view for Asa Ellerup, is that the hairs apparently, in one instance, at least one instance, they were found on the tape, on the duct tape. So there's transfer evidence. Maybe you could say, okay, on a belt buckle, perhaps, maybe inside the somehow with the burlap, but it is troubling, and I think a lot of people are troubled by it, and in a way you should be, that at least one or two of the hairs may actually have been on the tape that was actually used to bind the bodies of one of those girls. So that's what I think a lot of people have trouble, coming to grips with, the saying, well, innocent, guilty, is this a husband wife sort of team? And that's not unknown. That is not unknown. I know of a Canadian couple who were a younger couple, and they were engaged in serial killing, and the two of them did it together. So that troubles a lot of people in this case.
Mike, one of the things that I want to keep underlining to everyone listening is that the bodies were dumped there in, like, I think it was 2009, and they were not recovered until December 11th, 2010.
Right.
So some of them were there for over a year.
Yeah.
So this is out in the elements,
Mhm.
out, in a very unfriendly environment. Super hot during the summer and
Right.
freezing cold is right on the ocean
Right.
in the wintertime. So when we talk about evidence that survived this, it's incredible. And maybe one of the reasons something like hair, a very small particle of hair,
Mhm.
that it did survive, it was connected or held by the duct tape in
Right.
some instances.
Right.
And so that is, and I just want everyone to understand that, because when we showed that slide of what contains DNA, when we mean from an evidentiary point of view, usually in a crime where there is transfer evidence, you're talking about blood, semen, skin cells, tissue, organs, muscle, brain cells, bone, teeth, hair, saliva, mucus, perspiration. But in this instance, these bodies were out in the elements for over a year. So all of those things would have either been destroyed or dissipated. I'm going to play this from ABC News. They have a little angle on this.
Development in the Gilgo Beach serial killer case. Law enforcement are telling ABC News that a cheek swab sample taken from murder suspect Rex Heuermann's wife matches DNA found on the victims. And Aaron Katersky has the latest on this story. Aaron, good morning to you.
Good morning, DeMarco. This is an important development for prosecutors as they decide whether to charge the alleged Gilgo Beach serial killer with additional murders.
This morning, law enforcement sources tell ABC News DNA found on the body of at least one of the women dumped near Gilgo Beach on Long Island matches DNA from the estranged wife of accused killer Rex Heuermann. Asa Ellerup seen walking into Heuermann's latest court appearance last month, followed by a documentary film crew. Investigators had taken a sample from her cheek the day Heuermann was accused of killing 3 women he had solicited for sex. The sources said that sample matched genetic material found on burlap used to wrap the body of Megan Waterman. Prosecutors believe the DNA match strengthens the case against Huerman. They have previously cleared Ellerup of any wrongdoing, saying she was out of town when the killings occurred.
This is something different, but it actually adds to the evidence you have. It brings it back to that household in Massapequa Park, and that's what's important. It is unusual, and it doesn't come up every day.
Huerman has pleaded not guilty to killing 3 women, Waterman, Amber Costello, and Melissa Bartholome. Prosecutors say he's the prime suspect in the killing of a 4th, Maureen Brainerd Barnes.
Investigators believe they are now close to a decision whether to charge Huerman with the 4th murder, but as yet they've tied him to no other additional homicide cases, either on Long Island or elsewhere in the country. Eva?
So, Mike,
Yeah.
here's the problem. And the hairs were transferred, I believe, and I could be wrong. The hairs were transferred from either inside the house from Rex Huerman or from his wife onto Rex Huerman's clothing or whatever, and then transferred. But to play devil's advocate, and like a lot of people in the chat are saying, well, how come the children of Rex Huerman and Asa Ellerup, who lived in the same household, how come their hairs and DNA aren't on these bodies? Can you answer that, Mike?
Yeah, Billy, that's a great question. That's a fabulous question, because you would expect if Asa Ellerup hair was just, in the environment, a hair or two, which you would expect, in like fingerprints and everything, your fingerprints would be probably at least one set in every room in your home. So yeah, that's very troubling that the children's hair in a very small home was not there. However, Asa Ellerup's hair was transferred, and it was inside the burlap wrapping, and it was on the tape. And that is absolutely troubling, because it's a small home. If how people postulate he may have killed the victims in the basement, where it's quieter and farther away from where the kids may be. The fact is, if you're talking about transfer hairs, transfer DNA, that sort of thing, you would normally expect them. So why is there at least one hair from anyone else other than, Asa? And that is very troubling. And that's what gets a lot of people kind of upset, that, there is this clearing of her name at this time. And many people may feel that there may be some connection, either indirectly, where perhaps theoretically she may have helped dispose of a body, that sort of thing. And that's something that cannot be completely, discarded. That theory cannot be completely discarded at this time.
Laura Kang, thank you so much for the $9.99 super sticker. Folks, you got some really raising great questions in the chat.
Yeah.
How come there was no hairs from the dog or from the cat, besides the children? How come there was no other evidence that, well, as we said earlier, we don't know, did Rex Huerman commit these murders inside that house? Because, again, I would advise everyone to get a copy, everyone that's interested in this case, of that 32-page bail application reform for Rex Huerman. You can pull it right up on the internet, and it is the best evidentiary document you will read on this case, and it answers a lot of questions, and also gives you a lot more questions to ask. And one of the things they do is connect the times that they believe the victims disappeared. But they can't pinpoint the times. They can give a guesstimation. Let's put it that way. When was the last times they were seen?
Right.
And that basically is based upon cell phone evidence, digital evidence, if you will. When they were last seen, one of them was last seen at a hotel on a video camera. So matching that evidence, that digital evidence, against when these victims disappeared, is the best they can do. And with that evidence, with that evidentiary material they have is what they use to clear Asa Ellerup. I'm not really convinced of it, though, So when Maureen Brainerd Barnes disappeared, when was the last time she was seen? And it will tell you in this.
She was last seen about July 9th, 2007, I believe, Maureen Brainerd Barnes.
Exactly. And so they're matching that up with the way, Mike, I don't think it's just last seen, but I think they're also matching up the phones.
Right.
Call. Melissa Bartolome on or about July 10th, 2009. Megan Waterman on or about June 6th, 2010. Amber Costello on or about September 2nd, 2010. So all of those times and dates are the times and dates that they matched up that Asa Ellerup left the country.
Mm-hmm.
Or in one instance was in New Jersey.
Right.
So,
Amber Costello, for her disappearance, Asa was in New Jersey.
Right. So does that satisfy you, Mike, that clears her? Or are you a little bit more inquisitive than that?
I'm very, very inquisitive. You got to be as a cop. And I'm just not the most optimistic person in the world. I'm a little bit cynical. And I find it ironic that when it comes to Maureen Brainerd Barnes, who was one of the four Gilgo Four girls, and her death, there's been no indictment in her death so far, although we think Rex Sherman may be indicted soon. But in that instance, one hair was found, and that belonged to Asa. So, the police right now are clearing her, but clearance right now does not mean they cannot circle back and revisit all of that technology and think about theories about how the crimes could have occurred. There's no immunity here. She's not been granted any sort of immunity, that sort of thing. If at this point right now they don't believe she's involved, however, that doesn't close the door on anything further should any other DNA evidence come to light, or any other eyewitness evidence come to light, or any other evidence come to light. I don't really appreciate the idea that based just on the phone, although we know the phone is absolutely crucial, there may be other explanations about the phone and where she was at the time that these events occurred. These girls went missing.
Mike, also, and we'll get into it more later, but it further complicates matters that based on this documentary that she signed with Peacock, NBC Peacock, to follow her around with cameras as she visits her husband in jail, as she attends court proceedings. And I don't believe they'll allow the cameras in the courtroom. I can almost guarantee that.
Right.
But that sort of exacerbates things. And the other thing is that if she does get thrown in as a suspect, she's already represented by counsel. So he would undoubtedly advise her not to talk to the police.
Right. Yeah. It's strange. Interesting. As you bring that up, she already has an attorney, and he probably helped work out this deal, obviously, with the given the information for this documentary. I think the best thing they always tell you in law school is just tell your client to be quiet, and she's not going to say a word. And if I'm the attorney, I do not want her to do any sort of voicing over. I don't want her giving interviews to anyone who's technically involved in putting together this project. If they want to take her picture, fine, and give her $1 million. I'm her attorney. I'm okay with that. But I would not ever, under any circumstances, want her to answer any sort of questions posed unless their questions are given firsthand, and then she and the attorney would then figure out what exactly to say. So I think he's going to limit severely her appearance as much as he possibly can with this documentary.
This is how News Nation spoke about this earlier in the week.
About this DNA evidence is criminologist and Dr. Debbie Goodman. Debbie, thank you so much for being here. So obviously, as Laura outlined, the amount of DNA on these bodies will be a factor here. But does this revelation mean anything that the wife's DNA has been found on the victims? It seems like there are a variety of scenarios where she could still be completely innocent of these crimes.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, Kelly. Pleasure to join you for this conversation. So really, for me as a criminologist, there are two logical options. One of which is there is a possibility that she could be a co-defendant, an actual participant in the crime. I know that may sound quite alarming to the viewers, but we have high-profile cases of serial and mass murders that are conducted by a married couple, one of which was a Canadian case. They call it the Ken and Barbie case, and these two went on as to become serial rapists as well as serial murderers. So it's a possibility. But what I think is really, Kelly, the more logical option is what we call DNA transference. So certainly between the married couples that are in a day-to-day interaction, close proximity, we have hair, we have prints, we have fluid and such, that it's quite likely that the hair that may have appeared on the burlap of which the decedents were wrapped in, it may very well just be the transference, what we also say DNA association. Again, things are in the air, in the environment, in the content and context of which one resides. It's almost like, Kelly, the pet and the pet owner. The pet sits on the couch, the cat, the dog, with fur, with hair. Of course, there will be that on the couch. Now, the pet owner comes, sits down. What's the likelihood and probability of this transference of the pet's hair and fur? Very high probability. So I think that's the more likely scenario. However, nothing can be discounted, and this must be looked at again by the district attorney.
Well, I think those are great points to highlight. So, provided your extensive experience in this area, as DNA evidence is now so widely used, how common is a revelation like this, where a spouse's DNA is maybe implicated in the crime scene, but that person is innocent?
Yes, it's highly likely, because again, just the mere sharing of what? Sharing of mugs, of a toothbrush, of environments in which one bathes. And again, this day-to-day interaction of being in close proximity really creates the higher likelihood and probability of this transference. So again, high on our list would be things like the hair fibers, the prints, the saliva, and it can appear, and yet it's very alarming, of course, that it appears at the site, if you will, or the scene where the decedents are. That's where the DEA, just because one has been ruled out, can absolutely be ruled back in.
Agreed. And it'll be interesting to see how much DNA was in fact located. Criminologist Dr.
You know, Mike, that's what had me confused even during the week, was that the way a lot of the news stations, and I thought News Nation on this did a pretty good job, but a lot of the stations, they reported it as if there was brand new source of DNA.
No.
And that's what got so confusing. And I think that's what probably got confusing to our listeners as well in the true crime community. It was being reported that new source of DNA, and that's not true.
No, it's there's been no change in the sources of DNA and Asa Ellerup and DNA. But I think Dr. Debbie Goodman made a fabulous point. You sit on a couch, and in a small home that they have out in Massapequa Park, Asa might sit downstairs if there's, like I say, a finished basement, or in a bedroom. If one of the victims are killed in the bedroom or down there, and they're lying on the ground or they're on the sofa, and perhaps he wraps them up in burlap and tapes them, it's very likely that that's how That's a very good theory about how the Asa Ellerup's hair got onto the tape or got inside the burlap. But it is troubling, and I would like to hear from Asa Ellerup, although we're not ever going to hear from Asa Ellerup because of her attorney. But she left the door open, and I'm glad she did, because there is that possibility that there may be more to the story than what we believe happened right now, that Rex Sherman did absolutely every element of the crime, and that Asa Ellerup had absolutely no idea whatsoever what was going on. There may be something else other than that theory.
Absolutely. Dominique, it makes no sense in her husband's DNA, but they couldn't have done it together. Well, I respect your opinion, but I don't believe they did it together. I believe that
It's difficult. It's difficult.
She was an enabler. I think she
Yeah.
she sort of turned a blind eye to her
Right.
husband's activities.
Right. It's a very difficult situation to
Yeah.
wrap your head around. Absolutely.
But I don't think she was an active participant. But having said that, I also am a little bit concerned as why the Suffolk County Police deemed her not a participant and just sort of anointed her as innocent so early on.
Yeah, Billy, I'm as you're talking, I'm thinking all kinds of, like Phil says, spitballing, trying to come up with different theories. If what Johnny Ray had said in one of the affidavits, one of the affiants had said about the La Trapeze, and that perhaps both Asa and Rex were swingers, it is possible, and I'm always trying to think outside the box. Is it possible that Asa, would participate in some ways in order to make Rex more attractive to someone to go out there, figuring there's a husband and wife, we're going to get, you're going to have some sort of intimate relations, but you're safer with the wife there because there's less likelihood of personal danger. So she probably, I like the word you used, enabler, but that in that kind of connotes that she was an inactive participant, not an actual active participant in the homicides. But it is very troubling, and I think the viewers, and I think you and I and Phil and Bobby Chacon, we're all thinking, how does this all fit together? How does the puzzle all fit together? And we don't know. We don't have all the pieces yet. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Renee Keanu, thank you for the 199 super sticker. Renee, actually, there was a hair from Rex, but not from the children nor from the pets.
Right.
So could the burlap, could the duct tape, could it have been in a certain room that the children or the pets didn't go into?
Right.
I don't know. That's a little bit hard to believe because we saw the condition, or we were told the condition of this home. It was like a complete hoarder's home. So it would be difficult to believe that anything was separate in that house. But I can't explain why the children's hair and the pet's hair wasn't found where in the bodies. My only explanation is that perhaps the duct tape and the burlap was kept in a certain room. And we don't know if, in fact, we're sort of what Mike said before, spitballing of these crimes occurred in the house. We don't know that. But the evidence could have been dragged into the crime scene and thus left on the victims' bodies. Mike.
Yeah, Billy, as you said, Locard's, principle of transference. Once you walk out of a room, you take something with you. You walk into a room, you drop something off there. So in a very small house like this, it is that they had in Massapequa Park, it is possible that perhaps there was a room with a television that was only the parents' room and the kids were never allowed into. Maybe it was, I'm just thinking kind of like a finished basement, kind of a little bit out of the way, because I know there was a gun safe down there. So it's possible that you could have a room where it's, rare for the children to go in rather than say a den, a TV room, a kitchen, a mud room, that sort of thing, a dining room, so it is possible, but you're troubled by it. I'm troubled by it. And a lot of other people are. And I think that's good because you would expect, something, other hair there. Yeah, it really limits really narrows down the possibility of where, if the homicides took place, and I think they did take place in that home, where they took place. And it has to be, if at all, it would have to be in a place that only Asa has and Rex perhaps have access to, that's locked away. The kids are not allowed to go there. That's the only explanation I have for that.
Absolutely. Renee Keanu, thank you again for 199 super sticker. Asa, blind indifference or willfully blindness? Renee, I think that Asa, whether she was physically abused, I don't know, but she was absolutely psychologically abused. I have no doubt in my mind about that, because when we see the evidence of what this man was involved in based on the searches of his computer, he's a sick, sick individual. So sick individuals like that aren't normal in their interactions with family, friends, loved ones, coworkers. Some of it had to come out somewhere to showing. And you heard Commissioner Rodney Harrison basically say that Rex Human is a demon, is a demon, he practically called him an animal, right? And so those things had to come out in some fashion. A lot of you guys are troubled by Princess Adora, and you're so right. Yeah. It took place many years ago. Conditions could have been different. You are 100% right. We just said one of the bodies, this 2009, 2010, and 2010. So that's 12 years ago, 13 years ago, right? And how do we know what the conditions of the Uhrman's house was 12 years ago? Maybe they didn't have animals. Maybe the house wasn't in the condition it is now. Maybe it took years to develop into what they became, hoarders. Folks, if you like true crime, real crime from a police perspective, then you're in the right place. And if you're not subscribed to us, go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and ring that bell. And if you want to contribute to us, we have a Patreon with 3 different levels, and we also have a YouTube channel membership with 5 different levels. And we really appreciate all your support. We appreciate all our Patreon, our channel members, our friends, our subscribers, and they support this show, and they've made this show what it has become. And we're very proud of the show within the Police Off the Cuff family. So, Mike, that brings us back to John Ray, attorney John Ray. And I was bothered by his press conference, and I wasn't convinced about it, nor do I have to be. I can have a free mind, or based on my hypothesis, which is an educated guess, right?
Right.
I used to say to my detectives, stop hypothesizing and theorizing and start typerizing your report. That was the funny joke. But let me play a little bit of this with John Ray. And I don't know, the witnesses that come forward to him, I don't believe they can be discounted. I don't believe they should be silenced. I believe they should be heard. But at some point, they need to be vetted. And that's what we'll do here.
Previous reports have said that the DNA from her cheek swab matched the hairs found on, the burlap wrapping the victim. So from that, it would sound like we already knew some of this information. Is that the case? And if so, why would it then be surprising at all?
It may be the case that the present information is really originally the information regarding Ellerup's hair. I'm told that the hair is found on all 3 victims that were for which the charges of murder were made, and that there was a 4th hair found on the belt that is so controversial in this case. it seems highly unlikely that such a development as that could ever have exonerated Ellerup whatsoever. And when you really look at what the district attorney originally said, at that time, he was talking at the very beginning of the investigation about her, if you read the papers, her cell phone being in various places. That's not necessarily her. And even if it were her who had the cell phone, nobody knows when these girls were actually killed. They know when they disappeared, approximately, not when they were killed, nor when their bodies were moved, which could have been at a different time. So in other words, she.
You know, Mike, that is actually a great point.
It's a great point.
And we said that is that they know approximately when they went missing, but they don't know when they were killed. And they don't know, another good point is when they were moved to Gilgo Beach.
That's right. That's right. And that is in Johnny Ray, for as controversial and colorful as he is, he made fabulous points right there. And I think when he was there at the press conference with Suffolk County Commissioner Harrison, and Harrison said, you know, we're going to take this and we're going to vet this information. That's absolutely important because you don't like loose ends. I don't like loose ends, even as a uniformed police officer, and you and Phil absolutely not as detectives, and you as a supervisor. You want every loose end tied up because you know what a good defense attorney can do with a loose end. He could just tie your case up in knots. So therefore, you know, every single loose end has to be tied up nice and neat so we know exactly what happened. And he brings up a good point. We are not sure of the actual timelines of the interactions with, if it happened with Rex and these girls and where Asa was. We know her phone was in a particular location. We don't know where she was. A couple of days difference here or there could either clear her or put her in as a prime suspect. And so he brings up an excellent point. And until we have it down, if we can possibly ever get it down to something a lot smaller difference in time, rather than approximately this, approximately that, there's going to be that troubling question mark hanging over Asa Ellerup's head.
You know, Mike, what we're doing is talking about this case. And this is what real detectives do. They sit in rooms and they talk to each other about possibilities, probabilities.
Yeah.
And then they decide on what direction they are going to. And regarding Asa Ellerup, they decided early on, or at least as reported by then Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison, that they didn't feel she was involved. So that's what we are reporting. But we are also reporting the fact that she could still be put back into it if evidence reveals that she was involved. And like, if anyone like in the chat thinks that's irresponsible, that's how real police work is done, by asking questions, probabilities, sitting around and talking, going over evidence, what you spoke to, who you spoke to, evidence that you received, your gut feelings. All of that is part of detective work.
Yeah, Billy, this stuff takes a long time, and the detectives like you and Phil go over this stuff time and time and time again, looking at it from every single possible angle and see where the evidence actually leads you. And in this case, there's a lot of missing things, messes that need to be tidied up and fixed up and explained. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Let me play more of this with John Ray.
He should still be in the ring of suspects. And maybe the district attorney is taking now a second look and perhaps to the grand jury, especially given Ellerup's sociopathic behavior that doesn't match that of an innocent person whatsoever, especially now that she is selling herself like a ghoul, eating on the dead to get money for herself.
Yeah.
It's a stunning development. And the DA cannot look at that without a glance of great skepticism and perhaps we'll get somewhere now finally with what this woman is all about.
Well, on
I
that
have
point,
witnesses who say she's involved.
On that point, which is separate from whether or not she was involved, the 7-figure Netflix deal that you're alluding to there, you represent, some victims. Can only imagine how they feel about that. What have they told you about that, if anything?
The several victims I've talked to, we have a victim who's still alive, and we haven't disclosed her yet. And we have other family members of victims who've spoken to me and told me what this woman has done is unspeakable. And she's never once reached out in any sympathy for them whatsoever. This is a person who is just like her husband. She also participated in the sexual trysts of her husband in her house. We have witnesses to that effect. This girl needs to be looked at very, very carefully. She is, like I said, feasting on the deaths of these women.
But the prosecutors were fairly quick, right, to not charge her, to eliminate her as someone who would be charged with wrongdoing, saying, she wasn't even there. She wasn't in the jurisdiction at the time of the murders. But you clearly think that she had something to do with it, even with all of that said.
She seems to have everything to do with everything that's happened in that house so far. What's happened in that house is not clear. We don't know where the murders took place. There could be other locations where they took place, but how could this woman's hair and nobody else's hair, such as, for example, her children, such as her dog, her cats, not appear, and yet 3 of her hairs appear on 3 of the victims.
In DNA that's so old, by the way, didn't you think? I mean, you probably know more about this, but the fact that it's a decade old and you still have this, I mean, you would think it would be very degraded. It wouldn't be high quality, maybe not even identifiable. But it is. I mean, what did you make of that? The fact that it was so old and still they have this match reportedly.
Well, it just means that the hair did not degenerate. That's what it would suggest to me.
Yeah.
More than that, I can't say what it would mean. The DA would know, but the DA has been investigating this case steadily since the day that he first announced that she was in apparently another jurisdiction or jurisdictions. Those jurisdictions, by the way, are not far away from the site of the murders. For example, once she was in New Jersey, one can drive pretty quickly from New Jersey to Long Island, no problem. I think the other jurisdiction was a middle state like Virginia, I'm pretty sure. And then the third one was Iceland, where she has her relatives. Okay. So, I mean, these places are not that far away. Iceland is a flight home.
Right.
We don't know when these things happened. There's no evidence of that. Maybe the DA does by now, but that has to be looked at.
Right. The timing of the actual murders versus the discovery of the bodies and what have you.
Thanks so much for.
So this is what we were talking about, especially comparing the time they disappeared and marrying that up to the time that Asa Ellerup had left the country or was not in the jurisdiction. Difficult to totally pinpoint that, as they don't know exactly when these young victims disappeared, and they don't know exactly when they were dumped at Gilgo Beach. So again, difficult, and I always like to point out these are what has become known on the screen as the Gilgo Four: Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Megan Waterman, Melissa Bartolome, and Amberlynn Costello. And ultimately, they are the most important thing about this case. They are the victims, and that's who we are the most concerned with. And it somehow these spectacular cases become about everything else but the victims. And we never want to lose sight that they're the most important part of this case.
Billy, he makes a good point. Johnny Ray makes an excellent point. And, we've had our differences in terms of what we think of Johnny Ray over the course of the past 6 months. But he does intrigue me in that he did point out about the differences in where, Maryland or Virginia, you could drive down there and I can get to Washington, D.C. from my home in Yonkers in like 4.5 hours on a good traffic day. You can get to New Jersey in like an hour. So those are good points he makes. He mentioned previous victims. Now, I'm not sure what he means by victims, unless he's alluding to the fact that perhaps he has, affiants who are willing to come forward, sign something, testify at a grand jury regarding some sort of sexual tryst involving girls and Asa Ellerup and Rex in the house. And if that's true, it would change. It may change if this is verifiable. May change the way the police look at Asa, because at this point, especially when it comes to Maureen Brainerd Barnes, and on Maureen Brainerd Barnes, there was a human hair on one of the belts, the belt recovered from a belt buckle. And so I think that's rather tantalizing information if it can be verified. It's possible, depending on if there is any other, verifiable testimony and anything else they can come up with that, if you take it to its logical extreme, is it possible that she may be indicted as in the death of Maureen Brainerd Barnes, or even on a lesser charge of, say, mishandling a dead human body? So it's possible, but he brings up some tremendously important points. And I think that I'm hoping that the task force is looking into all of these things that he's provided for them.
Absolutely. Lieutenant Peter Pranzo, Harlem Raiders, NYPD's finest. Asa may not take a murder rap hit, but she will be taken for some type of cover-up or assisting with the bodies or for enticing the young women into the household for her husband. It's funny, Lieutenant Pete. That's what Mike was just saying.
Yeah.
I don't even know if he read what you wrote, but great minds think a lot sometimes, and it's when Johnny Ray was talking about that he has some witnesses right now, live witnesses that actually had interaction. He didn't say it specifically, but he's implying they had interaction with Rex Heuermann, and he told that story in the press conference that he had a woman, a man who was a New York City NYPD narcotics detective, and a second female that he believed was Karen Vergata.
Right.
And that went back to 1997. That was 1997. So it was nearly, maybe even 96. It was 26 or 27 years ago.
Right.
And the witness, the affiant, or the person who is swearing to this statement, is swearing to something that she saw or she participated in 27 years ago. Now, some of the things that she said and reported were checkable. They were things that they said that Karen Vergata, they picked her up in Manhattan and she had just gotten out of jail. That could be checked to see if, in fact, Karen Vergata was arrested 26 or 27 years ago, according to the time frame of the affiant in this case. Other things could be checked, but it seems that a lot of witnesses or people, sometimes people will also want to get their names out there and become involved in something they actually had nothing to do with. Believe it. We were the police, and people make false reports all the time. And I'm not saying that John Ray's witnesses, but you have to vet them. And so far, when John Ray had that press conference, the press bid it hook, line, and sinker. They were saying, "Oh, this changes everything." Now you don't hear anything about it again.
Yeah, Billy. If you gotta, the SCPD has to go over who these people are, and I'm hoping by this point Johnny Ray has provided the SCPD task force with all the information that he has. He's not holding anything back, and these people are vetted. And I think that people in the chat should just keep remembering that conspiracy to commit murder, criminal facilitation, meaning helping a crime occur, or engaging in a homicide, those sorts of crimes, there is no, especially involving a homicide, there's no statute of limitation. So if there is some, concrete, credible evidence, then Asa Ellerup should consider herself. And if I'm her attorney, I'm going to tell her that, you have no immunity. You can still be dragged into this. You better be very careful.
Absolutely. And BB2, member for 16 months. Thank you so much. Sergeant Bill, Ray just said they have a victim that's alive. How can this be hidden? Well, we sort of just addressed that at BB2, but I sort of did it in reverse. I saw your comment and I commented on it, and then I brought you up on the screen. But thank you for your comments. Yes. All of the, Rodney Harrison, of course, took some criticism about standing next to John Ray during his press conference, especially by Suffolk County District Attorney Ray Tierney, who seemed to have been horrified about that. But I felt that it made a lot of sense, because could John Ray and the folks that he's bringing in as witnesses, could they not become defense witnesses? And I'm asking a rhetorical question. Yes, they could be. They absolutely could be. So why not explore all the evidence and the information he's bringing forth, so that he can't say down the road that the police refused to listen to me, and I had alibi witnesses, and I had witnesses that put Asa Ellerup right in the trick bag here.
Yeah, I think perhaps Tierney was not nearly as welcoming regarding Johnny Ray, another attorney, because Johnny Ray is a very colorful character, and Tierney's the chief prosecutor for the county there. He's a DA. I'm glad Rodney Harrison was more welcoming to Johnny Ray, and he did say, I think towards the very end of the press conference, when Commissioner Harrison spoke, he said, "We're going to look into this," and which to me indicated that perhaps there really hadn't taken what Johnny Ray had said over the years. Maybe they saw him as a gadfly, somebody who's just looking for some publicity, a guy who's a pest, and maybe in the beginning he didn't have as much information at his disposal, and over the years has gotten some. I'm glad Rodney Harrison embraced it and said, "Look, we got to look at all this, because as you know, Billy, the moment that you don't, these people come forward, they can be defense witnesses and say, yeah, I've been giving the police information for several years now, and I've tried to tell them what I know, and they're not listening to me." And that goes to creating reasonable doubt in a jury's mind. And as I like to let people know that, remember, DNA evidence, cell phone record evidence, it's all circumstantial, and it can be disregarded by the jury. They may say something else is more credible, and they can actually give the DNA evidence and the cell phone evidence not as much weight and credibility and weight and legitimacy as we think it deserves, because they may go with a different theory as they're watching the case develop and they're listening to the testimony of the witnesses. So it's very important, and I'm glad Rodney Harrison did it. You don't want these people popping up on the defense attorney's witness list at the end of the trial. No way, no how.
Absolutely not. I'm going to play a little bit of this.
Sample taken from the estranged wife of the alleged Gilgo Beach serial killer matched her DNA material found on the remains of some of the victims. Investigators took a cheek swab from Asa Ellerup the night her husband Rex Heuermann was arrested in July. Now, they say that her hair was found on the burlap in which victims were found wrapped in. Prosecutors have cleared her of any wrongdoing and said that she was out of town at the time of the murders.
Well, that was sort of a quick report that that she was out of town, that she's been cleared by prosecutors. Yet, that's one of the things we're just discussing now. What could she be put back into the trick bag over this? And don't forget, and a lot of people were horrified by the fact that she is doing this documentary, and others are understanding. Oh, she needs money. He was her sole source of income. He left her high and dry. She's got cancer. And when you talk about someone making money, and we spoke about the victims in this case, of course, who we care about the most, the families of these victims, I think they're horrified by this, by the fact that a serial killer's family member can make money off the deaths of their loved ones.
Yeah, Billy, years ago, you would think that, if there was ever going to be a documentary or a Hollywood movie based on a true crime story, that it would take place after all the legal proceedings are finished. In this case, we have, and just like the Murdaugh case originally with, as we remember from last year, there was a documentary going on right before the murder trial took place. It's troubling, the timeline, because it's so compressed, and people should be concerned about it and say, what gives, and question it. But we also understand that if in fact Asa Ellerup is truly innocent, completely innocent, 100% of all charges, and she was asked to do this, help in this documentary, and there's going to be a documentary made sooner or later, and perhaps a book deal, and perhaps a regular Hollywood movie. She is probably looking for her family's health and welfare and saying, I got to bring in some income. And if that's the case, you can excuse it. But however, the victims in this case, I understand completely them being very upset because there hasn't even been a trial yet. And they want at least some sort of justice. And this just feels like a slap in the head, to them. And you got to understand that. You got to be sympathetic to them too. It's
Absolutely.
not an easy thing.
In the coroner system in the United States, and one of my good friends, Joseph, great to see you. Okay, let me first start here. I don't understand why he's been in Massapequa. If you listen to the evidence that he had been searching about the killer and felt that the heat might be on him, why did he spend his whole life here? I was shocked he's been there this whole time if he really did commit these crimes.
What's he going to do? Pick up and leave, Jesse? I mean, he's got an established architecture practice. He's a Long Islander, as
but he
you
allegedly
mentioned.
killed 3 people. Why wouldn't he take off?
Yeah, well, you would think so. But maybe, look, this is all speculation at this point, but maybe it's a big game to him. Maybe he's playing cat and mouse. Look, this guy, what was so fascinating about this, Jesse, is kind of the linear deposition of these bodies along that coastline that you know better than anybody. You grew up in that region. And that area right there, and it's not that far away from his home, not being a Long Islander, I had to map this thing out. He's 26 minutes from his street to this location. It's a very specific location that he would have had knowledge of and been very familiar. And what we do know about serial perpetrators is that they like to hunt and they like to perpetrate within those areas that they feel the most comfortable. And it seems as though if the police have the right guy, and it seems like they might, that truth, that one truth does hold true here.
I have to tell you, the police work here, exceptional, really exceptional, unbelievable. Because when we talk about cold cases, and
that is the first time that I have heard, because we've heard all kinds of criticism on the Suffolk County Police, most of it warranted. However, once Rodney Harrison took over 2 years ago and started the task force with the Suffolk County Police detectives, the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office, the New York State Police, the Suffolk County Sheriff's Office. Am I leaving someone out? I said the state police, right?
Yeah, you did.
That was the catalyst to getting this case going. And in fact, a female investigator from the state police came up with the most important lead, and that was finding the Chevy Avalanche and who it was registered to. And she found it was registered to Rex Schuerman, who lived in Massapequa Park. That information was in the folder for 10 or 12 years, and no one found it. Sometimes things, there's that old expression, you can't see things that are right in front of your face. And that was true. In this case, there was something right in front of their face that they weren't seeing, and I don't know why.
Yeah, Billy, I've heard explanations that they because it was like some sort of not a truck and not a sedan, it was some sort of like hybrid, that when they put the information in the first time years ago, back in like 2010, that they misclassified it. But you know what? That's not much of an explanation. Um, it is really upsetting when you look back now and you say, oh my God, right then and there, they could have had this guy years ago. And we hope to God that we don't someday discover that there is another body that Rex may have killed after the date that they went and they entered that information into the NISPIN number, or I'm sorry, DMV, and gotten not a hit. And so you just shake your head sometimes, but we just hope that SCPD continues on its professional trajectory, because Rodney Harrison breathed new life into that department. Thank God he did it when he did it.
Absolutely. But again, they did deserve some kudos here.
And even the Brian Koberger case, when that probable cause affidavit came in, I mean, just terrific police work. From what you saw, whether it's the DNA from the pizza box that matches up to him, that matches up to the hair that was found in one of the bodies, his wife's hair that was allegedly on or near the victims, the car, what stands out to you as the strongest piece of evidence?
Okay, first off, kudos to the police, because you know what they were able to do that a lot of people can't in cases like this? Keep their mouth shut and keep it close to the vest. That's a big deal. That's an Achilles heel in a lot of cases. Nothing got out. I mean, we were all gobsmacked when this happened. I think probably that hair. And what makes this unique is that, according to what we're hearing, it ain't his hair. It's a hair that he's domiciled. It's a hair originated from an individual he's domiciled with. And it's degraded hair, degraded DNA. They had to hold on to it. Remember, the science actually had to catch up with this case. We didn't do mitochondrial DNA back in 2007. So that's very key. And also this discarded pizza box, Jesse. Oh my God. They sat on this guy. They watched him. They watched his every move. So the circumstantial indicators here pointed to him. The police just sat back and they waited. They waited for that opportunity where they were going to put their hands on that thing that would tie him back. I don't know what other DNA that they have that is a specific tie back, because that box contained his DNA. There is,
this is also this report is before they swabbed. They had it matched up to Asa Ellerup, and they positively had the other hair matched to Rex Human. And again, this is Dr. Morgan is talking that the science advanced so quickly. They didn't have the ability to do this in 2010, but yet in 2022, 2023, they could do this now. And you notice the labs that are doing this work are private labs. So that's another thing. And we worry whether this science will be accepted by the law. And that could be a problem down the road also.
Yeah, Billy, it's very high. It's very high standard for acceptance of this sort of information, because there's a case called the Merrill Dow case from years ago, 2000, early 2000s. Supreme Court said, you have, in order to have this sort of scientific evidence, not only the old standard was, is it generally accepted in the community, scientific community? Now it's a much higher standard, and it's you have to have demonstrated many times of the continued reliability, time and time and time again. It has to be written about. It has to be approved by the community, scientific community. It has to be written about. There has to be law journal articles about it. So therefore, it's much higher. And so this is what I think is troubling for some, defense attorneys, is that the science has moved so fast that has the legal is it still as reliable as we want it to be in a court of law in order to satisfy the burden of persuasion and the Merrill Dow standard. And as a defense attorney, I could see that it has moved so fast, so quick, and it seems so amazing. You just hope that it is all absolutely correct and reliable in like 100% of the cases.
Absolutely. Let me play a little more of this, Mike.
And I wanted to ask you about the way the bodies were found. If we can play
Yeah.
this is number one. This explains, this DA Tierney explaining how the victims were bound.
Right.
They were buried in a similar fashion, in a similar location, in a similar way. All the women were petite. They were they all did the same thing for a living. They all advertised the same way, and there were immediately there were similarities with regard to the crime scenes. All the women were bound at the head, at the midsection, or at the chest, and later at the legs.
So, Joseph, I'm not going to go through the internet searches that he allegedly made on a burner phone because they are just absolutely sickening. But I'll tell you this much. The way the bodies were found seems to be very consistent with those searches. What do you take away from the way these these people were killed?
Yeah, the first person that comes to mind, Jesse, is bind, torture, kill, is Dennis Rader. You know, when you begin to think about these various points along the continuum that he had an interest in, that's as far as I'll go with that. But what I will say, when it comes to these bindings, that gentleman was very specific. They are bound. And so those knots in particular are going to be particular to the individual that tied them. It's kind of like a signature. Also, when we look back also, we don't know all of the evidence that they have at this point. Think about those burlap bags. How often have we heard about burlap bags in all the cases that you and I have covered? That's something very unique to this individual. Did they come from the same manufacturing lot, perhaps? Is that something that the police have, where they manipulated or cut in a particular way in order to facilitate the storage of a body?
And thank you for watching.
That was excellent. And one of the things
Yes.
I just want to bring up about is that serial killers work in a very specific way, and they have what's called, and we know in law enforcement as MO, modus operandi. And they like to do things in a very specific way. And frequently, perpetrators do not like to change their modus operandi. And I won't say that they will never change it, but they don't like to change it. And then there's also something called signature, which can be something that a perpetrator does on every one of his crimes. And I don't think Rex, if you want to call wrapping the bodies in burlap bags his signature, that potentially could be signature, but it could also be part of his MO. But it's more or less how they would commit the crime. And if you read the bail application affidavit, there are no causes of death listed in the bail application. However, it is said that they all died from a homicidal cause, not from natural causes. But they don't say they died from asphyxia, they died from a gunshot wound, they died from blunt trauma. That, I guess, was impossible to tell based on the fact that they were out there for over a year.
Yeah, Billy, if they did, that would be, you know, the cherry on top of the ice cream sundae. They don't have that. But all of the other MO, part of the MO that you're talking about, the binding of the bodies, you know, head, chest, legs, wrapped with duct tape, put into a burlap bag, some sort of camouflage burlap, placed in a particular spot, all within, you know, all four found probably within several hundred yards of each other, indicating that this person who put them there is one person, and he put them there because that's the best place that he could figure out to put them, where they would never ever be found. And you know, serial killer, they have their MO. It may change. We've talked about that in previous shows, but they want to be in control of their environment. They want to do things a certain way. If they can get away with a crime one way, they may go back and do a very similar crime the second time, because there's a lot less variables. They get it down. They figure it out. They're successful once. They'll try it again. Successful twice. They'll keep going. And so therefore, it's all about control. You got to be in control. You got to be in control of the how you do it, how you dispose of the person. You know, all of the little variables, you want to be in control.
Absolutely. Venus Gal So was the belt buckle a big mistake or an intentional taunt, in your opinion? I think the belt buckle happened to be a mistake. I think he made a mistake. However, there was signs of taunting in this case, and that occurred when he actually used the phone of one of the victims to call her sister. I think it may have been of Melissa Bartolome. I believe he used her her phone, which he took from her after he killed her, and called and taunted her sister.
Yes.
And in other instances, he used burner phones to call family members and taunt them. That is a sick, sadistic way of a sexual psychopath. And they get off on things like that. Another thing that's common with serial killers is that they like to go back and visit the crime scene. I would not be surprised if Rex Heuermann had gone back to the area where he dumped the bodies just to sort of relive the thrill of that. And that's a common psychological pathology of a serial killer. Mike.
Yeah, we saw this with the Kohlberger case when his cell phone was tracked to going back to Kings Road, the Kings Road residence, 8 hours after we believe the homicides were committed. He was back in the area. And yeah, we know this is also true with arsonists, serial arsonists. They want to, they run away and then they come back to see how great their handiwork is and see all the emergency trucks all over the place. And yeah, and maybe too, with Heuermann, he'd return just to see what the graves look like, because, you know, you might be digging up that grave at 3 o'clock in the morning and you want to go back some other time to make sure in daylight, does it look disturbed? You know, did you do a good job covering your tracks? And so therefore, yeah, that's a very common thing. And I wouldn't be surprised if he did that.
You know, Mike, I would sometimes in homicide, when we would go to a scene and it would be a big crowd behind the yellow tape, I would take pictures of the crowd.
Right.
And that served several purposes. One was that when we did canvases and people said, I know nothing about this, I wasn't even out there, or we could identify people in the crowd that were out there and we would grab them and bring them in and say, what'd you see? And of course, I was in New Jersey, and you would be, well, you're in this picture that I took
Gotcha.
several minutes after the murder, so you better come clean, you know. Or potentially the killer could be in the crowd. As we were just talking about, killers like to check out their handiwork, if you will, even though that's probably a bad way to put it, but that's absolutely true. I want to play a little bit of this here.
Murders returned to court on Long Island today. And for the first time, Heuermann's estranged wife, who is now under contract with a production company, was also there. Prosecutors say they may be close to filing charges in a fourth murder. Here's Long Island reporter Shantae Lance.
Surrounded by state court officers, Asa Ellerup, the estranged wife of accused Gilgo Beach serial killer Rex Heuermann, attends his court appearance, a first since his summer arrest and arraignment.
How was it being there?
Ellerup says nothing. The mother of two filed for divorce from Heuermann shortly after his arrest, but recently visited him for the first time in jail.
Other than the correction officers and myself, he hasn't really have any interaction with anybody. So the fact that his wife, his family member, was able to see him and they talked, that was important to him.
Inside the courtroom, Rex Heuermann, standing tall and stoic, is silent as his attorney and the prosecutor discuss evidence.
Primarily today, what we turned over was all of the lab work that was done in the case, as well as the underlying notes.
The last thing that we're really looking forward to, and we have not received them yet, are all the notes of the investigations from all the police officers and detectives involved in this case. Because as many of you know, there were so many suspects over the years.
Heuermann has been charged with 3 murders and is a prime suspect in a 4th. Suffolk County District Attorney Ray Tierney speaking to me about the 4th murder outside of court.
He's a prime suspect for a 4th possible murder. Where are you guys with that in the investigation?
Yep. How are you? So the grand jury is continuing, and the grand jury in that matter is continuing. We anticipate it concluding shortly.
Rex Heuermann is due back in court in February.
Rex Heuermann.
So now we know, of course, that his wife is now visiting him. You may ask the question, is she visiting him now because she misses him and supporting him, or is she visiting him now as part of the show business for this documentary?
Yeah, it's tantalizing because it's a tantalizing question because you're not sure. Husband and wife, you always got that confidentiality of information, which can, under some circumstances, be broken. And she could possibly, in the future, if there's any sort of her involvement is ever formalized in some sort of grand jury, not grand jury, grand jury subpoena, and also an indictment, you may have a totally different relationship between those two. But it may be just for Hollywood, just to get some shots. But or maybe if you're really cynical, you're thinking perhaps he's going to agree to keep his mouth shut. She'll agree to keep her mouth shut, and don't make it any worse with the Maureen Brainerd Barnes case, which is the one that they're looking to indict him for next. So very tantalizing question.
Absolutely. Folks, if you're looking for a great defense attorney in the New York metropolitan area, then Joe Murray is your man. Joe's a retired NYPD police officer and a fantastic defense attorney. You can reach Joe on his cell at 718-514-3855. Email him at joe@jmurray-law.com or go on his website, jmurray-law.com. Not only is Joe a fabulous defense attorney, but he's a friend of the show and a big supporter of the Police Off the Cuff podcast. So, Mike, I'm going to go just to wrap this up. And here's the flyer for this show. Positive DNA swab on Asa Ellerup. Will she be charged? And my feelings are no, she will not be. I believe that it is transfer evidence. But I also believe, and we'll put this out there, is that if there is evidence that points towards her, at any time she could be brought into this case and she can be charged. Your thoughts?
Billy, I agree. Right at this point, the tyranny doesn't seem to be zeroing in on her whatsoever. Things may change, but I agree 100%. Right now, the chance, if things are going the way we predict they're going to go, she will not be part of this case at all, and she'll be free. But you don't know. You just don't know until the investigation continues, until we get any other further evidence. But I agree. I don't think so. I think it's probably transfer evidence, but you never know.
Absolutely. I want to thank everyone for tuning in on this Sunday early evening. I know you went away from your football games, your soccer games, or whatever to join us, but I really appreciated many new people joining us today. I felt it was an important thing to talk about. Many others reported on this, but I thought that the way that the media reported it, it was a bit confusing, and I wanted to clear that up. And I think we did that with my friend Mike Geary here, the voice of reason, the attorney, the retired NYPD sergeant. I think we did a pretty good job doing that. Mike, your final words.
No, just for everyone to please, read as much as you can on this case, learn as much as you can on this case. And if you're wondering about what's going on, tune into Police Off the Cuff, because we're going to give it to you from a police officer's perspective, a homicide detective's perspective, not a journalist perspective or somebody who's just looking for clicks on the internet.
Folks, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Bill Cannon from Police Off the Cuff. On behalf of myself and Professor Mike Geary, have a great day and God bless.
Good night.
One episode just ain't enough.